All right. Welcome everybody to the Bustin' Burnout Workshop with Brandon. I don't know if you saw my post the other day, but I killed the alliteration game. There was like 6 B's in there. Burst breathing for a burnout break. Yeah, killing it. Julie, the poet, is like very impressed right now. So today we're going to talk about burnout. We were just discussing the following 2 workshops that are going to happen after this and the progression that we might take it from here. But I want to start with burnout because it's a common problem um, in our work life as knowledge workers, as most of us are. And it's actually, near and dear to my heart too. I've experienced burnout multiple times in my career, and it's nasty and I don't like it. So I imagine most people out there that have experienced it or are experiencing it probably don't like it as well. So I want to give you a little bit of knowledge bombs here and there for you to understand what it is, how it happens, and what it's not. Um, a little bit of the research behind it, and then some practical tools to get you out of the hole if you're in it, but also to kind of burnout proof your physiology and your psychology so you don't have to ever experience it. So as we go through this, there's not a whole bunch of us. If you guys want to unmute whenever and just throw out questions, feel free to do that. You can also put them in the chat whenever you want, and I will try to make sure that I am keeping up with that. If I don't, again, throw up a hand or a finger or just yell at me. All right. In the immortal words of the Black Eyed Peas, let's get it started. All right. Can we all see my screen? Yeah, cool. All right.
Yep.
We are busting burnout today. So, what is burnout? First of all, if anybody tells you that burnout's not real, that you're not a candle, you can't burn yourself out, they're wrong. Slap them in the face, throw something at them, yell at them, whatever you need to do. Because burnout is definitely real. And actually, as of just a couple years ago, it is now a medically recognized syndrome by the World Health Organization. And this is from the ICD-10. I think we're on like 11 or 12 now, but this is the International Classification of Disease. So this is what psychologists and MDs and otherwise use to classify different disorders and things. And this is straight out of the book. Burnout is a prolonged response to chronic emotional and interpersonal stressors on the job. And is defined by the 3 dimensions of exhaustion: overwhelming exhaustion, cynicism, and detachment, and inefficacy, or a sense of ineffectiveness and lack of accomplishment at work. So just some highlights of statistics from a recent report. 50% of entrepreneurs, these are mainly focused around entrepreneurs. And you may say, well, that's not everybody, but entrepreneur is a real broad term. And most of us on this call are in fact entrepreneurs. And even if you're not a classic entrepreneur, a lot of us are building things even outside of a regular job, like moonlighting as something else, or, we have entrepreneurial mindsets. And entrepreneur to me is mainly, it's just somebody that's got ambition above and beyond being content at their current level and, um, driven for more. So the survey that they did with entrepreneurs, some of these statistics were just kind of mind-blowing. Number one, 50% of entrepreneurs are facing burnout. That's way too many. That's ridiculous. Like half of the people that you meet that are running their own business or building something or freelancing or whatever else are experiencing burnout. That's a massive amount. And then what was the other really, really crazy one? 30% of entrepreneurs have depression, which is kind of a symptom of burnout. Depression and burnout tend to run together. They mimic each other. They almost mirror each other. They look very similar. You'll often get diagnosed with depression. And this is a personal story for me. I was diagnosed multiple times in my life. I've been diagnosed with depression. I've had chronic major depressive disorder, yada, 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 anxiety, all these things. But misdiagnosed more recently in 2019 with depression and given medication for it, when really it was, looking back now, it was just burnout. It was just psychological burnout from being overworked and in a way undervalued at the place that I was at. So anyway, that can kind of mimic each other. They can show up at the same time, and you guys will get these slides too in the replay if you ever want to go back and look at some of these things. So what does burnout actually feel like? And we'll get to this in a second, but I'll just kind of mention it now, that it's not adrenal fatigue. Okay, now those are different things, and we'll separate them here in a second, but this is more of a psychological syndrome or disorder, more so than a physiological one, but it often turns into one. So how does burnout itself feel? Emotional exhaustion, right? Your tank runneth empty. Okay, you start to get very negative. In fact, studies have shown that people experiencing burnout are unable to filter out negative emotions or dampen them down. They experience negativity on a greater scale and higher level than people that don't have burnout. They start to experience this crisis in their feelings of competence. Their self-efficacy starts to drop. They feel like they're no longer competent at their job. Again, it looks like depression. Low sense of self-worth and low drive and ambition. Again, these kind of show up as that hopelessness that we often see in depression as well. But it's that kind of thought that like nothing I do matters, right? This is all for naught. And then a loss of pleasure in the activities and their passion for work or for life. Not everybody's super passionate about their job. That's understandable, but oftentimes you can still find joy and, flow. We all here know what flow states are, right? You can still find that in your work, and it's ripe for that. But when you're burned out, all goes away. It's not even possible to find it. And it spills over into, losing passion for the things that normally really give you joy. Like I don't like to go ride my mountain bike anymore. I don't want to go dancing anymore. I don't want to do any of these things because I'm just so burned out at work. So again, this is different than adrenal fatigue, which is more accurately known as HPA axis dysfunction. HPA meaning hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. This is your stress response. Okay, these brain areas and major glands control your stress response and also bring you back to homeostasis. That's kind of its main job, if it's got a main job. When this thing is out of whack, we get elevated stress response that stays elevated for long periods of time. When that chronic stress response is elevated, then we start to get what's colloquially called adrenal fatigue. It's kind of a misnomer because your adrenals don't actually get fatigued, but they will downregulate their response to normal stress when it's elevated for a long period of time. And I'll kind of show you a graph a little bit later of what that looks like, but it's important to distinguish these because you can have symptoms of burnout, the emotional fatigue, the chronic stress psychologically, well before you have any symptoms of adrenal fatigue. And I'll just continue calling it adrenal fatigue if that's all right with you guys. It's less syllables than HPA axis dysfunction. It's easier on my brain. So although they often end up occurring together, the point here is that if you can notice the burnout symptoms and that path that you're going down, you can often stop it before it gets to the point where you get adrenal fatigue and your stress response is really dysfunctional. So HPA axis dysfunction, when it does get to that point, there's a lot of issues that are going to happen from this physiologically. Behavioral dysfunction, cognitive dysfunctions, immune responses, cardiovascular, every other system, including your neurological system, all of these are going to be affected when you start to get that stress response out of control. Okay. So burnout and what it actually does in the brain, because it does change your brain in some ways when you have this exposure to burnout over a certain period of time. And the main ways that you want to think about this is these first couple right here. The amygdala, which is that threat detection center in your brain, in the brainstem, at the top of the brainstem. We sometimes refer to that as like the old brain. Some people call it like the lizard brain, right? That's our first line of defense. And it's where our threat detection happens. It also is where our fear center sits. When you are experiencing burnout, this actually swells up and enlarges. And if it's long enough, it will actually change and grow. That's not good. We don't want that. We do not want an enlarged amygdala. That just means we're going to be heightened state of stress and threat all the time. Everything's going to feel like a threat. Everything's going to be, you're going to create a lot more fear responses from the nervous system when that threat detection is like super sensitive. And the other thing that it does is decreases connectivity of that survival brain, the lower brain area, and the frontal lobe. Our prefrontal cortex, simple or specific areas are the anterior cingulate and medial prefrontal cortex. These areas are involved in expressing emotion, but also regulating emotions. So on the one hand, inhibiting unwanted emotions or unwanted thoughts, okay? And in a sense, kind of turning the dials down on that survival brain. That old brain, the survival brain with the amygdala and the brainstem, this is the area that has no rational thought. There's no logic back there. It simply responds to perceived threat from the environment. It doesn't care about the context. It doesn't care about anything. It doesn't care if that's a lion chasing you, salivating with sharp, sharp teeth, or your boss that's just being annoying for the umpteenth time and doesn't value your work. Your amygdala does not care, okay? When you're in burnout, you're much more likely to take that. Yeah, Nick, you have a question?
I was just going to ask real quick, if it gets enlarged through, whatever, can you bring it back down?
Yeah, you absolutely can. Yeah, this is reversible, which we'll get into in a minute. But none of this is set in stone, and it's just like a muscle can hypertrophy and grow. Your amygdala can do that. Your hippocampus can do that. So you're better at storing memories, your hypothalamus, these things. It can also atrophy. It's kind of a use it or lose it, right? So if you're constantly being stressed out and constantly getting triggered for burnout, that's why that amygdala starts to enlarge and grow, because it's just being triggered all the time. But if we can tune or rewind the dials, get that amygdala to slow down, get this frontal lobe in front of the brain where it inhibits the old brain, it gives more context, right? We can reverse that, shrink it so it's not as active and hypersensitive. So good question. So that's the main thing. Enlarges the amygdala, so we're under threat more often, we're more hypersensitive to threat, more fear, all these things. and less emotional regulation, less inhibition of emotions because we lose the connectivity to the front of the brain. Okay, so those are the main things I want you to remember, because we're going to do some drills here in a minute that actually work to connect, bring back that connectivity from the back of the brain to the front of the brain. All right, so what to do about it? We know what burnout is, what it feels like, what the eventuality can be physiologically and in your body, how it changes the brain. So what do? Well, there's two ways to approach burnout. The first one is top down and then bottom up. So top down is more from the psychological or mindset arena. Okay. I'm blanking on her first name, but kind of the godmother of burnout research is, I think her name is Christina Masloch. She has, over her 35 years of research, discovered that there are 6 main triggers for burnout. Okay. And she actually has a really easy and quick burnout inventory that you can take to see which of these you are most susceptible to right now. And it's a really useful tool. So those 6 burnout triggers are lack of control. Okay. So not feeling like you have control or autonomy over your work, over the direction of your work. Number 2 is values conflict. So if you've got conflicting values with your organization, maybe you value honesty and integrity, but your coworkers or your boss are just going behind people's back, gossiping all the time, talking smack, or being dishonest about expectations or, promotions, whatever. If you have a conflict of values, that's going to be a huge stress that can lead to burnout. The next one is insufficient reward. Insufficient reward, the obvious ones are, you're not getting paid what you're worth. That's going to create some tension and can lead to burnout. It can also be insufficient recognition of the work that you're doing, right? You worked super hard on this project. You presented it. You thought it kicked butt. It hit all these markers, and you get nothing in terms of praise or whatever else. That can hurt, and we're all super tough and like we got thick skin and everything, but that's not how organizations and teams should work, right? So if there is insufficient reward, that'll lead to it. Work overload, that's the most common one that people think about when they think about burnout. And it's very true. If you just got way too much work and not enough time to do it, or way too high expectations from team members or colleagues, then you're burning that candle on both ends. But the point to remember is that that's only one of 6. These other ones are just as important to look out for. Unfairness is the next one. If things are not fair in your workplace, an easy example of this is like you have all the merit and you are the best person for the job, but you get passed over for the boss's cousin's ex-wife's kid. Like, so nepotism, that's super unfair, right? That's not a good way to feel good about, where you're working, and can lead to burnout as well. And then lastly, breakdown of community. And essentially, like, if you don't have support in your job, or you're working in a toxic environment and there's people that are just undermining you all the time, they're not allowing you to do good work, or just conflicts all the time, that's going to be an incredibly stressful place to work. So these 6, in whatever ways they show up, they're the places that you want to look. And if you take that inventory, it will rank you. That's what this picture is over here. It will rank you, in which of these 3 areas am I most likely to experience burnout? Where's the risk? So I definitely recommend taking that inventory. It's quick. It takes like 10 minutes. All right, now, everybody here on the call is familiar with flow states because some of us have worked together in the past. or just because you follow me on social media, or I know you personally and I never shut up about them. So you're familiar, but for anybody watching the replay that may not know what flow states are, real quick, definition is it's an optimal state of consciousness where we feel and perform our best. Okay, it's another way to say it is it's those moments where we are completely absorbed in the task at hand, so much so that our sense of time starts to disappear. Things slow way down or speed way up. Our sense of self vanishes. We become merged with action and awareness, a surfer that merges with the wave, a musician that merges with their instrument, a runner who feels one with the road. Okay, it is an effortless, so our performance is on another level that we may never experienced before, but it feels effortless and we have a sense of control, right? So it's that peak performance state that we're all looking for in whatever we're doing. And in many ways, it is the opposite of burnout. And I just put these flow triggers next to the burnout triggers to show you how this stacks up. Burnout is lack of control. Flow, we have autonomy. Burnout, we have values, conflicts. Flow triggers, especially group flow, we have blending egos and shared goals. We're all going after the same thing. Insufficient reward and burnout triggers. Flow triggers, we've got immediate and accurate feedback all the time. Okay. Work overload, challenge, and skills are balanced when we're in flow. It's not too hard, but it's not too easy and we're bored. We're finding that flow and we're growing and pushing harder. Burnout's got unfairness, flow triggers, especially group flow. We've got equal participation. Everybody's doing their part and right where they need to be for their skill level. Breakdown of community, social support, right? It's just that simple. It matches up really nicely. Now, that's the top down. Okay, so is everybody good on what to do if we find that we are at risk of any of these triggers? Does anybody have any questions on that? Because we didn't go super detailed into that.
You don't mean, well, so no, I don't know like what drills to go to, right? If it's like,
Yeah.
okay, I'm now like, I'm melting down. What do I do about it?
So that will actually be, we'll take a bottom-up approach and we'll work with some neurotraining drills, which I want to get to. That's why I'm kind of rushing through it. That's why I want to take a step back because that's the fun stuff we'll get to in a second. But this top-down approach, it's more of a psychological type process, right? If you have a lack of control in your job, then you need to find some autonomy. You need to go to your boss and ask for more autonomy in what you're doing. Like, stop micromanaging me, please. I can do this. Give me some rein here. Okay? That's how you can gain some control in this way. If you've got a values conflict, if it's something that it's a core value of the organization or that team that you just don't mesh with, you might have to find a new team, right?
And if you're in flow, you're probably not going to just go boldly, blatantly telling your boss quite.
You do have to be careful when you're in flow to kind of rein yourself in a little bit, because when you're in flow, you actually turn down the dial of inhibition. So you're more likely to take risks than you would be otherwise. So it might not be the best time to go have like like approach a conflict with your boss at that time. Might not be the best time. You might want to be in flow, write it down what you want to say, and then look at it when you're not in flow, and you can be a little bit more objective, and that filtering process and that critic can look at it with a more critical eye. Okay, so that's a good point. But yeah, if you are feeling a lack of control, you got to find some autonomy. Get somebody off your back. If you're feeling a values conflict somewhere, you need to address that. You need to find a place where you can work with integrity if that's a high value thing for you. If you're feeling like you're not rewarded, you got to ask for a raise. Okay. You got to work in feedback somehow with people that you trust. If you're just overloaded with work, that's a conversation you need to have, set expectations, or take a break for a couple weeks, right? Take a vacation. That's not something to rely upon, because if these other things are out of balance, when you come back, they're still going to be out of balance and you're going to be right back into burnout. But if it is truly just work overload, take a break, right? Scale back the work, focus on what's most important, those type of things. If things are unfair, I mean, life is unfair, but if it's really unfair and if like the nepotism example, you know, you got to approach that. You got to be, you know, like, don't get crazy and just quit or throw rocks at your boss or something, but, you know, voice your concerns, voice and bring that unfairness to light. If you have a breakdown in community, find ways where you can build social support into your job, or find it outside of your job if you can. If it's just not going to happen in your job and you've tried, you might need to find it elsewhere to support the lack of community you have in your job. So these are ways that you can start to turn the dials on those psychological type triggers for burnout. Okay. Now, the bottom-up approach is how we actually increase our capacity to handle the stress so that we don't experience these burnout triggers and the physiological side, and we can handle them better. And also using the neurotraining to, in the moment, ride the waves of our biology instead of just constantly grinding, pushing harder and harder and harder, which leads to diminishing returns and then eventually burnout as well. Okay. So right here at the extreme end, we get this adrenal fatigue. But burnout and adrenal fatigue are adaptations to this chronic elevation of stress on two fronts, because of the psychological triggers, but also because we have low capacity and resilience to the stress response. And this is what that chronic stress response looks like. We have a stress, our sympathetic system amps up, right, to get us moving, to get us through the stress, to get us to do whatever we need to do. Consider it maybe that fight or flight response. We got to do something. It moves us to action. However, when these psychological triggers are present, or we just don't have a good recovery process, our stress response stays elevated. Over time, if it remains elevated, then I don't know if I put this one in there. I didn't. But over time, if it remains elevated, we're going to have more of these stressful situations, and then this elevation tends to just go on this upward climb. Eventually, you're going to reach a point when your nervous system is like, this is enough. We can't take this anymore. I'm going to dial everything down below baseline, and I'm just going to not give you the same stress response to handle it because it's causing threat. That's usually when we start reaching for stimulants, or when we start using external ways to replace the normal stress response. Okay. And personally, I've been through that roller coaster 4 times because I take the hard way to learn. I like to really, really hammer it home and learn the hard way. But 4 times, and this was around the pandemic when I was starting a new business, had to shift, kind of lost everything. So the psychological triggers were very high. They were very present, but I just kept grinding and pushing and pushing. And I was a personal trainer and running my own business in a gym and just trying to find clients and clients and clients and clients after I had just lost everything. Instead of trying to recover, I was working 80-hour weeks, and just reaching for the caffeine. And I was misdiagnosed with ADD and depression, so I was also on Adderall. I was abusing the heck out of nicotine, another central nervous system stimulant, doing everything I could to just keep going. And I would go through this cycle of about 6 months where I would ramp up till my caffeine consumption was like over 1,000 milligrams a day. And my body would just eventually say, nope, you're done. Game over. You're going to take 2 weeks and you're going to do nothing because you can't move and you have horrible back pain and you get headaches and all of these symptoms all just came at once. And then I would slowly crawl my way back out of a hole until I could start grinding again. And it was just pushing up until eventually your body shuts down. And with that came the depression, the hopelessness, the anxiety, all of those things. And it just becomes this vicious cycle. So that's what happens with chronic stress over time. We just keep pushing until eventually our body just shuts us down. So I don't want that for you guys. Hopefully you've never experienced that before, but if you have, here's how we get out of it. Number one is we change from, well, before I get to that, we change, actually, no, I have a slide for it. It's right here. We need to expand this arousal graph here. We need these lines, those dotted lines, to grow, okay? And we do that with the 6 non-negotiables that you just got a preview of, which we'll talk about in a second, and with neurotraining and doing these little breaks where we can recover so we can add more stress, and then we recover, and then we take on more, and we just continue to build that capacity. So we actually ride the wave of our biology, which works in this way. It works in this way with these little waves like this. This is how your biology works. So when we try to go on this straight line up and up and up and up, we get diminishing returns. Whereas if we can actually ride these waves, we can grow and grow and grow in our capacity. So the neuro drills that we're going to do, well, first let's talk about this. The first thing you got to do is you got to take care of these 6 non-negotiables. They're the foundations for health and especially for flow. If you're not taking care of these things, you got to get them into at least a daily practice for most of them. Some of them you might not need to do every day, but sleep, we all know, is the most important practice you can have for peak performance. If you're not sleeping well, nothing else is going to perform well. Exercise to build capacity, to build energy capacity so you can take on more without overdoing it. Nutrition and hydration, mindfulness and gratitude, again, mitigating the stress response and the emotional response to those 6 psychological triggers. All of these things are your basic foundations. So if you want to learn more about those, this is just a little cheat sheet that I had thrown together in one of my previous guides. I can email that to any of you guys, or you can just download it from the website. I'll throw it in with the email and the replay, okay? But if after we take care of those 6, okay, then we're going to use neuro tools for regulating the nervous system and the stress response. And this is the daily, like, intra-day neuro drills that you can use to manage this energy demand right here, okay? And so if we are feeling burned out and we're feeling super low, we're on that lower end, right? This is like, I have clients that have experienced burnout in the past, and their nervous system ramps everything down and is like, you need to just sit down, go to sleep, and let your body recover. I'm gonna turn the dials down so you don't have a reaction to anything. You feel numb, shut down, you're apathetic. You don't want to do anything. Lethargy is like present all the time. In that case, we don't need to dial down the nervous system. I don't need you to calm down, right? You're already really low. I need you to pick it up a little bit. So we're going to actually stimulate your nervous system to bring your stress response up naturally. Okay, and those are going to be the drills on the right side of this slide. Okay, on the other side, if you are hyper aroused, you're feeling like you're in a situation where your boss just like came in and said something stupid again, and you're already a little amped up from an email you got from a coworker who's just a total tool, right? You're hyped up, you're hyper vigilant, like your startle reflexes on like high alert, everything's up here. You need to calm down a little bit, right? We need to bring that level down. That's where we're gonna implement the things on the left side to bring it back down to homeostasis. Okay, so let's talk about the down regulators first. Okay, and we'll probably try a couple of these. The first one is NSDR. All right, so as you're going through your day, you've had these parts of your day. And if you guys are familiar with the flow cycle, we might not be, but it happens in usually like a 90 to 120 minute rhythm throughout your day. You could kind of break it up into these blocks. We call them infradian rhythms. Like a circadian rhythm is a full day. Okay, an ultradian rhythm is much longer. Think like a moon cycle or a menstrual cycle, 28 days. They're much longer. An infradian rhythm is a much shorter cycle. Think of a sleep cycle, 90 to 120 minutes. So this is kind of how your energy ebbs and flows through the day. So if we can learn to ride those waves by going, pushing hard during the first part of that cycle, dropping into flow, expending a bunch of energy, getting stuff done, and then taking the time to recover out of that cycle, you're going to be much more prepared to go after it again and climb that ladder again without hitting that diminishing returns and dropping into burnout. Okay, so the tools over here are how you're going to recover. Okay, so when we're feeling amped up or we need to recover after a flow cycle, these are some really easy tools. NSDR is non-sleep deep rest, also known as yoga nidra. This is like a 10-minute, essentially like a body scan where you're getting out of your brain, out of your mind, and into your body. Eyes closed. There's lots of great meditations. You can just search for it like on YouTube or whatever else. This will actually replenish your dopamine stores by like 85%. Okay, and get you prepared and recovered. It's almost as good as taking a whole sleep cycle without even actually sleeping. It's not required that you sleep. It's non-sleep deep rest. In fact, in most yoga nidra practices, they don't want you to fall asleep. If you fall asleep and you take a little nap, good. Then you probably needed a little sleep. That's fine. But you can take that 10 minutes and you can really recharge your batteries very, very well using this practice. Okay. Now, cold exposure, that is on here because of the way that it helps to override the nervous system and kind of shock it into rebounding back down. Okay. So what do I mean by that? I mean, if you're amped up and you're kind of stuck, you're stuck above the homeostatic line, right? Sometimes these drills over here on the left to bring it back down can be really helpful. Sometimes they're just not enough. You need something a little more intense. And the analogy that I use is like if you've ever had a car where the accelerator kind of sticks and like you get to the top of the hill and you're like in first gear or second gear and you're stuck in that gear and the accelerator's kind of stuck, you're just revving your engine and you just can't get that thing to unstick. Well, one of the best ways to get it to unstick is to press it all the way to the floor. Ramp it up and then it'll unstick and drop back down. That's kind of what we're doing when we do like cold exposure or like moderate to a little bit higher intensity exercise. Same kind of thing. We're stressing the body in order for us to get that parasympathetic rebound back down. Back down to homeostasis. You'll even go below, but then you'll level out really nicely. So cold exposure, cold shower, cold submersion, even hands in ice water for a minute or two can really help to bring that back down. Inhibition tools like earplugs, colored glasses, an ab belt or compression clothing. Those will give you good sensory input and block some sensory information to bring the nervous system back down. And then we got gaze stabilization and long exhale breathing, or the physiological side. These are really easy neuro drills that you can do to down regulate the system. Okay, the long exhale breathing, really simple. Just lengthen your exhale as long as you can. If you have a straw or something to breathe through, even better. The gaze stabilization, just pick a point in the distance is best and stare at that point for 10 up to 30 seconds, maybe even longer. And you'll notice a down regulating response. Your breathing calms down. One of the best ways to do this, if you have access to a window, is to look out a window as far in the distance as you can. Even better, go outside and look into nature at a vista that's as far away as you can. Your eyes will actually diverge a little bit. This is known to be really calming for the nervous system. This is why nature immersion also is very calming, okay? Which should be on this list, nature immersion. But any of those tools are down regulators when we're feeling amped up or when we need a quick recovery after a hard bout of work. Now on the other side, up regulators when we're feeling low, when we're getting ready to do a workshop and we need to amp ourselves up a little bit. Okay. We're going to do these drills over here. If you guys saw my posts on Instagram the other day, we did burst breathing. This one's really simple. It's just a really quick puff of air, forceful puff of air on the out, and a quick sniff on the inhale. You do it for 10 seconds, just like this. It's about coordination, okay? And using the diaphragm. It's going to reset the diaphragm. It's going to deliver some oxygen to your brain. And it's going to activate an area of the brain called the cerebellum, which is really helpful for tamping down that amygdala response. Also, good coordination of movement and connecting back of brain and front of brain. Bouncing, same thing. Why don't we try this one? And I'm cheating because I actually know 2 of you on this call love bouncing. So we're gonna actually try this one. So also, so people on the replay kind of know the process of how to try these drills. We're gonna choose an assessment. Okay, so a range of motion is fine. You can use any kind of rotation like your neck. I will often use just a shoulder abduction. So keeping the elbow locked, point the finger or point the flashlight. And feeling some restriction right about there. Okay, so that's my baseline assessment. Now we're gonna test bouncing. So if everybody does an assessment, great, good job. Let's test bouncing. You're gonna hold on to your desk or something in front of you. You're gonna pick a target to keep your eyes locked on, and I'm gonna come up on my toes and I'm just gonna bounce up and down. The target needs to remain clear. If it's doubling or if it's getting blurry, Then you want to stop and maybe shorten your bounce, or maybe bounce from your knees. After about 15 seconds, it's good. I'm going to retest my assessment. So lock the elbow, point the flashlight. Much better. Okay. I started here. Now I'm almost hitting my ear. I got a little more I can go, but that's a much better, that's an improvement. And that's what we're looking for. When we do any kind of neuro training, you're just using your assessment to kind of communicate with your nervous system. How did you like that input that I just gave you? Bouncing for me, great input. My breathing calmed down a little bit. I feel more alert. Okay. So with any of these, use that test. Next one is a pencil push-up. All you're going to do is look at the head of a pen or pencil, bring it in, follow it with your eyes to the bridge of your nose. If it doubles, take it back to 1 and follow it back out. I would do that 1 to 3 times. That's going to activate the area of your brain called the midbrain, which is responsible for your sympathetic response. So if you're feeling low, we're going to drive activation to that midbrain through this eye or vision drill, and that's going to ramp things up. Okay. Again, always assess and reassess. That was good. If I would have done 2, I'll tell you right now, probably wouldn't have went as well. It's a powerful drill, so be careful with it. The coordination chart. Stroop test, we'll skip that one for a second. Stroop test is, I think I have quick reference. You have to look up the Stroop test. If you don't know what the Stroop test is, look that up, because it's like it shows you a color and a word. Those are optokinetic strips, Joe. Those are cool too. Good activation drill. But the Stroop test, you can get an app for it, or what it does is it has like the word and then the color, and it says you have to either guess the color of the word or the word itself. So it's an inhibition drill for your frontal lobe. It's very activating for this front of the brain. That's the point of it. So look that up if you want to try it. It's a fun game. And I just want to show you the coordination chart real quick, which you can just look up a coordination chart on Google, okay? And you'll find something like this. This is a really good coordination drill for, again, connecting back of the brain, front of the brain, right? Damping down that amygdala response, lighting up the whole brain with activation, and really kind of amping things up, getting you going. So how this works is if you see the star on the right of the line, you're going to hit your right thigh. If it's in the middle, both thighs. If it's on the left, left thigh. So I'm going to start by reading just left to right all the way down. Okay. If you guys want to do it with me, please feel free. Test my shoulder. I got right, middle, right, left. And I'm totally screwing it up now. You can get about 6 of them wrong in this. About 10% inaccuracy is normal. But again, much better test for me. That worked really well. Again, connecting the back of the brain, front of the brain. Isometrics, any isometric exercise like a wall sit, a plank, just holding your arm, right? Also going to drive a lot of activation to that frontal lobe, okay, to get things up, regulated when we're feeling a little down. All right. So those are your drills that I want you to practice, test, use often. Now, this is just one part of what I call the NeuroFlow method and my coaching program that we're going to be launching here in February. It's a 12-week group coaching program, and this is one of the steps called the energy amplifier, where we're really using exercise and nutrition, those 6 those 6 flow foundations and non-negotiables to really get the energy capacity built so that we can, number one, make you immune to burnout, but also find and expend the energy needed for flow. Okay. One of the 9 kind of steps in there. If anybody is interested in discussing this a little bit more, I would love to, get on a call with you for 15 minutes, see if it's something that you're ready for, and talk you through it a little bit. And from there, does anybody have any questions on burnout, neurotraining, flow states, race car driving, Celsius versus Fahrenheit conversions? Just kidding, I don't know anything about those. Any questions at all?
Not really for me.
Cool, good. That means I just covered it all perfectly then, right?
No, you didn't. Not ever.
Yeah.
Back to the beginning. There was a question about the amygdala. Oh my God, braces. And is that reversible, right? And you said, yes, it's reversible. I wrote down a question of just generally with any of the stuff that you talk about, especially neurological stuff, is there anything that's not reversible that we do need to worry about?
Good question. Yes. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is like a neurodegenerative disease, like Parkinson's or Alzheimer's. Like we don't have cures for those yet, and we can't really reverse those. I mean, there probably is a way somehow, but we just haven't found it yet. That's kind of my belief, right? But barring that end of that spectrum, like most functional changes that we see that over time can turn into structural changes, like enlarging of the amygdala, those can be reversed with training. Just like your vision can be trained, like visual clarity. Most people think that their vision just gets worse with age and that's just how it's going to be. It's not true. You can train that to get better. So with the nervous system, the best thing about it is that it's like endlessly plastic. Up until the day you die, your brain is continually changing, always. So it's just, are we being intentional about training it in the right way so that we're getting the desired changes that we want? With that amygdala, like, again, use it or lose it. If we're not using that front part of the brain, if we're not using the connections and we're constantly just getting stuck in this limbic escape or this amygdala movement all the time where it's just constantly being activated, yeah, it's going to enlarge. The pathways that we choose most often become the most robust. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that definitely answers that question. But of course, right at the end there, you kind of sparked a thought, which leads to a question. With everything you just talked about, I had this thought or vision in my head of like, gosh, with the level of plasticity that you're talking about here, it almost makes me think about how a lot of times when we look at society and we see folks, in like their, late 70s, early 80s, late stages of life. And some folks you'll see and you're like, oh my gosh, I want to be that active when I'm that age. I want to be that cognizant, have that great memory still at that point in time. And then there's other folks and you're like, oh my gosh, I hope I never end up like that, right? Outside of, neurodegenerative diseases like you talked about. Do you feel like the training you're just talking about there, the plasticity, do you think that's what makes the most difference in those later stages of life between really being able to be active and productive and not?
Yeah. In a word, yes. But I think there's twofold to that. And one is novel stimulus, because for plasticity, especially to combat cognitive decline, we need novel stimulus. That's the only difference between the plasticity between an 80-year-old and a 20-year-old, is the 20-year-old is getting way more novel stimulus because life is still pretty new to them. The 80-year-old's been through a lot. They've seen it all, so to speak. And they get stuck in their habits. So if we can introduce more novel stimulus, we can combat that cognitive decline and keep the plasticity strong and keep it going. The other end of that is movement. You just got to keep moving in all different ways and add in the novel stimulus to the movement part too. Move in all ways possible in all these different directions, all different speeds, different loads. Try different movement practices, dancing is a perfect example, like doing all sorts of different types of dance, learning new dances, right? Because it's so novel and there's so many different ways to move, you're constantly getting new stimulus, which is really helpful for your brain and also for your body to keep moving. Like the people that live the longest in the world are usually people that live in rural areas, these blue zones, and they are off until the day they die. They're out there like harvesting their own food. They're gardening. They're going to community events where they're getting a lot of social interaction and they're moving around a lot. So movement and novel stimulus for your brain. Cool. Anybody else? We went over a little bit, but you guys are fun to hang out with, so. This is all I had on my dock today. I put it all aside just for you guys. I thought we might go for 6 or 7 hours. Not really.
I just want to chime in there about that latest conversation, Claire. The environment matters, right? So when you're in a new environment where you can practice these types of things, so like coming into this community that Brandon's creating and going through that stuff, like that's novelist creation and it's curiosity. Like your questions are curiosity. So that's like one of the greatest aspects. But that all boils down to a cellular level. So there's taking care of ourselves through movement. But if we don't pay attention to the toxicities that we build up in our body, whether we're rubbing them on or we're feeding them to ourselves, then your cells are going to become part of a bad environment, and then they don't create healthy cells. And when abnormal cells get created, then we call that cancer. But what Brandon is also speaking to, once you start to learn to do the drills, then you're also communicating with all of your organs internally and stuff as well. Like if you're so stressed out, like the HPA axis is so blown out, you're in adrenal fatigue, how do you hit rest and digest without neuro drills?
Yeah, good point. You don't. When you're stuck in that chronic sympathetic state, that parasympathetic nervous system, that rest and digest system just doesn't get a chance to do its job. So you get gut issues, you get all sorts of other digestive problems. So well put, well put. All right, guys. Well, this has been fabulous. Thanks you all for coming. Yeah, Joe. Yes,
I was just going to say, like that was a huge connection for me and how you explained this today, from ground up versus top down perspective of like, where's that person at in their adrenal response stage of life, I guess, right? So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, good. Yeah, I'm glad that was helpful. It's helpful for me to think about it that way. Like, where are they at right now? What do they need? We need to cover the top-down approach first, the psychological part. Let's see where you're vulnerable. And then let's look at your bottom-up approach. Like, where are you at physiologically and neurologically? Like, what do you need in order to bring you back to some kind of homeostasis? Yeah. Cool. All right, guys. Well, next week, I got all your emails, so you're all on the list. I'm gonna send out a replay link if you want to watch it again, and then let you know what next week's the topic, what it's gonna be on. It's gonna be the same link, hopefully. I'm figuring out this Zoom thing that I've been doing for 4 years now. Finally figuring out how to make a standing appointment. But I'll communicate with you via email. And yeah, thanks for being here. See you guys.
Bye.